Good morning and welcome to Rosebud Homestead. Today we're going to continue our lessons in bread baking, and notice that I've removed the word first lessons in bread baking from the title of the video because we've done 3 first lessons and that's enough for firsts. So we're now going to expand out just a little bit. Thanks so much for joining our community this morning for this video. We're so delighted to have you here. We focus on food security, self-reliance, and emergency preparedness. And knowing how to make our own bread is very much food security and self-reliance. So we're going to get started on today's bread baking lesson in just a moment. So today we're going to deviate completely from our basic recipe, and we're going to start learning some ways with yeast. As a matter of fact, we are going to reduce the amount of yeast to a surprisingly small amount. Now, this recipe you would need to do on a day where you're going to be at home most of the day. I'm going to introduce you to a more professional way of baking bread where they talk about the amount of hydration in a bread. I want to talk a little bit about the tools that we're going to need for doing this more professional type of approach to bread. First of all, you're going to need a food scale. Now, this one of mine is very old. It's cracked on this side. I've taped it, and Jim keeps saying I need to have a new one, but you know, this one is working just fine. But food scales now are very inexpensive. You can get them from under $20. And once you start using a food scale, you're going to wonder why you ever didn't use it from the beginning. And then I'm going to be using a little thermometer. And I have a couple of thermometers. I'm going to be measuring the temperature of water with this one because we were doing the wrist method before, and while that will work, if you don't have a thermometer, we want to be as accurate as possible with this. So here we go. Now, in talking about bread in terms of hydration, we're going to start with, and by the way, when you get a food scale, be sure that you get one that measures grams as well as ounces, because bread recipes that use the professional approach always use the metric system, which is grams. So we are going to put 1,000 grams of flour, and this equates to 7 1/4 cups of flour if you measure by volume. But measuring by volume is not as accurate as measuring by weight, or in this case mass, the same thing here. Okay, so that's not quite enough, so we're going to need to add some more. All right, this is 1,000 grams of flour. We're going to put it in our bowl. And we're just using the regular bowl that we have used before. Now, for the hydration, we're going to do a 72% hydration, which means it is 72% of the weight of the flour, which is 720 grams of water. And that water needs to be at the temperature that we're used to, between 90 and 95, less than our body temperature. If you use the wrist method, you know what to do. But today we are going to use, actually, I'm going to measure the temperature of the water. That is 92.8, so it is between 90 and 95, which is exactly what we want. And so I will take this up to 720, which should be about 3 of these, we'll see. And now we just dump the water in. Now notice I don't have any flour on the side. We're going to be 100% accurate with our measurements, and so there's no wiggle room here. And so with this, I'm again going to get my hands in this, and you don't have to, if this is uncomfortable for you, you can mix this with a wooden spoon. And we're only going to be using 4 ingredients today: flour, water, salt, and yeast. And you're going to be surprised at how little yeast we are going to use. So this flour is now becoming hydrated with the water. And we're going to give it some time to get completely hydrated. So I'm just going to mix this up a little bit. It's going to be a little bit sticky right here at first. And then we're going to let it just sit like this for 20 minutes while the flour becomes completely hydrated. And that's an important, very important step, to give the dough a little bit of time to become completely hydrated. Now, right now, we're not necessarily developing the gluten. We are just getting the water mixed into the flour. Okay, now it's becoming sticky, so I can feel now that the absorption of that water is working. Okay, so we're just going to give it now 20 minutes. I'm going to cover it with a plastic grocery bag like we have done before. If you have an enclosed container like a Tupperware or something, you could also use that. But we want it to be kind of airtight like this, wrapped up, and I'll see you in 20 minutes. It's been 20 minutes, and we were not expecting any rise, and we didn't get it, so that's just fine. But now the flour is completely hydrated, and so we're going to add the salt and the yeast. Now, this recipe calls for 4 grams of yeast and 21 grams of salt. The yeast, which I will do first, is the same as about 1 level teaspoon, if you're not going to do it by weight. The amount of water that I put in, I should tell you the equivalent measure on that is about 3 1/8 cups of water. Okay, so let's do 4 grams of yeast. 1 teaspoon of yeast. What a difference this is from the 2 tablespoons that we have been using. Now, the real benefit of using such a tiny amount of yeast, and this is all it is, just 1 teaspoon. The benefit, and I'm just sprinkling this on the top, is that with less yeast, it requires more rising time. And more rising time allows the yeast to ferment longer, and it develops the flavor more. Less yeast, more flavor. 21 grams is about a tablespoon plus a scant teaspoon. 21 grams. And we're going to sprinkle this on the top. We're done with the scale now. Okay, this is what the dough looks like with those things on the top. Now we're going to go to a familiar process. We're going to fold as we go around, and then we're going to pinch. And as you pinch, this is the caterpillar, we've called it. We're going to fold and pinch until we can't feel the grains of salt and yeast. Pinch, pinch, pinch. And in fact, I'm just going to turn this out on my... So it's going to fold. Notice I'm not needing any flour, which is a good thing, because I don't really want to work in any more flour. And now I'm going to pinch. I'm still feeling, and so I'm going to fold some more. This is both mixing and beginning to develop the flour. Pinch. Okay, now I'm feeling less of those grains. So it is getting mixed. Now, if it does start to stick to my hands or to the counter, I'm going to use water. I'm not going to use flour. I don't want any more flour in this. And pinch. Okay, now it's mixed. It's hydrated, so now we're going to let it rest. And again, we're going to let it rest for 10 minutes. That helps to develop the gluten. We'll come back in 10 minutes and do more folding, not more pinching, but more folding. And then after that, we're going to let it rest for about 30 minutes and then do the same thing. So I'll come back one of those times to show you what we do. And then after that, we will be ready to let it rise. So see you in just a bit. I just decided to bring you back both times I do this so that you can see. This is after 10 minutes, and you can see that it's all flattened out now and it's becoming quite smooth. So I'm going to gather this back up and do a few more folds. And we are starting to develop the gluten. We can start to see the webbing and the bubbles. So just this little folding about 4, 5, 6 times around is all that is needed. Then I feel that I'm popping bubbles, and now notice how smooth it is on the top, and it's all standing up. Let's see what happens now in 30 minutes when we come back after giving it a rest. This is 30 minutes later, so let's check it out. And it's spread all out again, and yeah, we're getting bubbles, so that's good. Now we're going to fold it again. Oh yeah. So just folding it and turn and fold and turn. And I'm popping bubbles. I can feel them. So the gluten has developed nicely here, and will continue actually over the next few hours. Now this bread, oh yeah, lots of bubbles. This bread is going to be very, very tasty because we're going to allow it to ferment for now. As it rises slowly, we're going to let it ferment for between 4 and 5 hours. This will allow the yeast to ferment and lend that lovely earthy taste to the bread. It should be very delicious. Now we're going to finish this bread off. It is 2 loaves, but we're going to do it in 2 different ways. What we want is a crusty bread on the outside, unlike the other soft crust that we have done for our first 3 videos. This one should have a hardish kind of crusty crust, and then a beautiful soft crumb on the inside. And so I'm just going to put it right back here in this bowl. And then my kitchen is about 70 to 72 degrees pretty much most of the time. A lot of people are really persnickety about, oh, you have to do it in exactly this temperature, and if it isn't, then you have to put it on your dryer or put it over a heat source or something. Well, not me. It has to deal with my kitchen the way my kitchen is. So, you know, just build a bridge and get over it, bread dough. And so I just let it rise. If my kitchen heats up, then it's going to rise faster. If my kitchen cools down, it's going to rise slower. And you know what? I can live with that. I'm out there transplanting all the last of the plants from my greenhouse into the garden. I can't run in here and check the temperature every 5 minutes. So I will be checking probably after about 3.5, 4 hours, and we're going to let the dough tell us when it is ready, and I will show you how we will do that as we go along. So I'm going to cover this again, and I'm going to go back to my transplanting, and we'll see you in a few hours. Well, the best laid plans. Unexpected things sometimes happen, and I'm afraid that this has overproofed. We'll find out in a minute. We got a call from my brother who was driving right down our highway, wanted to stop in for a few minutes. A few minutes led to half an hour, and so I hardly ever see them, so we wanted to see them. So let's see what our damage is here. Oh yeah, okay. So this is overproofed. But there is nothing to worry about. Even though it is overproofed, and you can tell it has risen probably 3 times, and that is okay, but it had these big bubbles that got popped. So here's what we're going to do, and let's see, it is almost, so it has been 5 hours since we did our last resting on the early dough, so the timing is about okay, but I'm going to put a little bit of flour out here, and then I'm going to pull the dough out, and you can see how it's very gassy, and it will still have enough power with the yeast to do a final proofing, so I'm not a bit worried about that. It just got a little bit too high on this stage, but no big deal. We can deal with it. Okay, so we're going to finish these up 2 different ways. And these are, you can see how bubbly they are. I'm going to divide the dough so that we have 2 loaves. So 1 loaf we are going to allow to proof and then bake in this pan right here. And the other one, I'm going to do a round loaf and let it rise in this basket, and then we are going to bake it inside a Dutch oven. And while I do this, I'll explain why we're going to do that. So I'm going to set this blob aside, and I'm going to show you how we will do the one that's going to go in the basket. So I'm just going to, again, fold it, and this is degassing it. The bubbles will pop up. You'll probably be able to hear some of them popping. There was one. You can see a great big one right here. So we're degassing, and I'm bringing it into a round ball. And I am popping as many of these bubbles as I possibly can. And all this just on a teaspoon of yeast. Okay, now I'm going to take it to a part of the counter that does not have any flour, and I'm just going to pull it and stretch the skin across the top so there is some tension. I want that tension. Okay, so that's good enough. Now I'm going to put the finished side up and the ugly side down. So here's the ugly side that was against the counter, and I'm just going to lay it in this basket. If you want to try this and you don't have a fancy basket like this, just use a bowl. It will work just fine. You're probably going to want to spray it lightly with oil or something so that this doesn't stick, because we're going to be taking this out of the basket. You'll be taking it out of your bowl and putting in a Dutch oven if you decide to do it that way. Now this other half we are going to do in our traditional way. Again, we're just going to degas. Now, in order to form that nice crusty crust, which is what we are wanting, we have to bake with steam. That's what gives bread the really nice crusty crust. Now, inside a Dutch oven, as the bread bakes, it's going to give off steam. The steam will not be able to escape, so it's trapped inside the Dutch oven. And that is how we get steam for the one in the Dutch oven. For this one that will go in the regular pan and cooking in that dry oven, we have to provide some steam. So there are a couple of ways to do it. One way is some people just throw some ice cubes on the bottom of their oven, and then they, of course, melt and boil and produce the steam. Or what we're going to do is we're just going to put a little pan of water in the bottom, and it will come to a boil and produce the steam that way. So that's how we will be doing the steam for this one. Okay, now this tight little roll, I'm wanting to pinch it together at the bottom. And there's a big bubble right there. Getting a little bit more flour here. And then rolling this one last time. Again, this rolling puts tension across the top crust, which is what we want. I don't like that. It's a bubble right there. There are some bubbles. I'm working pretty fast with this because it was overproofed. So normally I don't have to do this. And then we're just going to place this one right in this pan. Now, the long proof, taking 5 hours, has already been accomplished. So now we're just going to leave these at room temperature out on the counter until they are proofed and ready to bake. And so it should not be more than about an hour and a half. And so we will be back when these are ready to go into the oven. It has been almost exactly an hour and a half, so let's check to see how our bread is doing. Oh, this one looks marvelous. And this one does too. Okay, so we're going to check the proof to see if we are ready. So I'm going to dip my finger in some flour, and with a floured finger, I'm just going to poke right in. Now, if it bounces back immediately, it needs more proofing. But if it moves back rather slowly, then we're ready to go. So let's check. Oh, that is so ready to go. Do you see how slowly that is moving back? So we're ready. Now, a couple of things. If you do this style of bread right here in the round basket, then all of the instructions for doing that are in this book. And this is flour, water, salt, and yeast. And you may remember that's exactly what I said our ingredients were at the beginning. This book is by Ken Forkish, and it has changed the way that I do bread. A lot of the methodology that I now use for all of my bread is a takeoff on a lot of the things that he says here. So this is what we are going to do. We have to get this out of the basket and move it into the oven inside a Dutch oven. And there's a special way that we do that, and I'll show you that. This one, on the other hand, is just going to be a regular loaf. It's going to stay in this pan. It's going to bake in this pan. The oven has been preheating for about a half an hour or 40 minutes because it takes that long to get that Dutch oven hot, hot, hot. Now you bake these breads in a hot oven at 375. Now I have found, for me personally, for my oven that runs a little hot, I bake them at 365. So know your oven, and as you bake bread, you can adjust the temperatures as necessary. So we're going to move over to the oven so that I can show you how I put this one inside the Dutch oven. This one is going in the oven as is. And you can see the pan of water right down here, and it has started to boil just a little bit. So I'm going to close that so that it stays warm. Now, how we get this out of the basket, I dip in and get a little bit of flour and do a little bit of flour here and on my hands. And then I take no chances in burning myself. So I have these great big long oven mitts. I'm going to reach in and grab the lid. Get it over here so you can see. I grab the lid and put the lid over here, and then in the basket right here, I turn this bread out on my hand like this. And so this was the ugly side that is now up, and you'll see why when we take the bread out. Now I'm literally going to fold this in half, it doesn't hurt a thing, and put it right in that Dutch oven, and notice that it deflated a little bit. That also doesn't matter. And we're going to get this back going as quickly as possible. And we are going to set the timer for 25 minutes. After 25 minutes, I'm going to take the lid off the Dutch oven, and I'll bring you back so we can see the color of the bread inside that Dutch oven, and then we will adjust the time after we see that. So I'll see you in just a little bit. It's done. Look how beautiful this is. Wowie wow. Let's turn it out. Okay, over we go. And there it is. Now it's a little brown on the bottom. Usually I don't let it go that long, but I did have a little bit of a disaster. So here are the 2 loaves of bread, and I'll tell you what happened. I realized that when I was telling you the temperatures, and you probably noted that on the video, I put a little note in writing down at the bottom that it wasn't 375, it was 475. And then I realized what I had done, and I did indeed set the oven to too low of a temperature. So I had to move the temperature of the oven up, and so it did the preheat thing again, which is why this one is a little bit burned on the top. But it will be okay when I get, oh, first of all, listen. Do you hear the crackling?
It's from both.
Uh-huh. And I love that sound. Listen to the crust. Crusty crust. Let's try this one. Same thing. So these crusts turned out perfectly. So this is beautiful artisan bread. And remember that the top of this was the ugly side that was originally down in the basket. But when we flipped it up, that ugly side, instead of having to use a little razor blade to cut like artisan bread, it just opens up like a rose, all on its own. And so we don't have to make any cuts, and I just love how it does. So this is a beautiful loaf of artisan bread that is so easy to make. You can make it in one day. And in just a few minutes, we'll cut into these to be able to see the crumb. But we need to let these cool just a little while.
Let's go.
All right, let's take a look at this bread. So we'll do the plain loaf first. Crusty crust, just how we like it. And there is the crumb. It is absolutely beautiful. Oh, it smells so good. And I think that you will enjoy the taste of this very, very much because the yeast has offered its little bit of fermentation here, and it tastes great. So there we have that. In his book, the one that I showed you, Ken Forkish has a lot of specialized equipment, and I have made another video using this very recipe that I'm going to put a little thumbnail at the end of this video so you can take a look at it and you can see all of his specialized equipment. I wanted to use just plain regular kitchen equipment today in case you don't want to buy all of that other equipment. I'm holding this closed so that we can have the big reveal, and ta-da, there it is. So again, very crusty crust. Now, this will soften up if you store it in plastic. If you want it to keep the crusty crust, then store it in paper. I always put it in plastic anyway, but we usually enjoy a nice piece with a crusty crust, and it's so much fun to bite into. So this is your first lesson then in doing artisan bread. So I hope that you try these, whether or not you do the round loaf or the regular loaf. This is a great bread recipe to learn more about the diversity of yeast. So thanks for being with us, and we will see you at our next video. But we are going to, I'm going to introduce you. Having a food scale is going to, once you...
Let's start over with the food scale because I got mixed up on that.
And then a beautiful, what the heck is the middle called?
Crumb.
Oh, thank you. A beautiful soft crumb on the inside.